Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kaylee Lines.
It's Jay Powell's last meeting as chair, just as his replacement clears committee. Welcome to the Wednesday edition Fed Day with an announcement on interest rates now 1 hour away, followed by Powell's final news conference, with the Senate Banking Committee voting today to approve Kevin Warsh as the new chair. We're going to get the latest in a moment from Stuart Paul at Bloomberg Economics with insights from our political panel today and from Republican Senator Shelley Capito of West Virginia. It's the fastest show in politics today. We've got special coverage starting in just a half hour, and we start, as always, by setting the baseline on Wall Street. Let's turn to the markets. Here's Amy Morris.
This Fed decision amid mounting concerns that any elevated energy prices are going to curb the potential for interest rate cuts this year. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. S&P 500 down 0.25%, NASDAQ down about 0.4%, the Dow down 0.6%. 10-year Treasury yield at 4.39%, the 2-year yield at 3.91%. Now let's look at oil. Both WTI and Brent crude are more than 7% higher. NYMEX crude oil now topping $107 a barrel. Brent crude topping $119 a barrel. Investors looking for clues on which direction the stock market will be headed in the coming weeks. They'll be getting a rapid fire reading as soon as trading ends today. 4 of the biggest companies in the U.S., Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft, are going to be reporting their earnings after the bell. And if they all hit at the same time as last quarter, this should all play out within just 80 seconds. We're buckled up. The Fed's April rate decision is about an hour away, 2 p.m. Wall Street time, but the focus may be less on the future for rates than on Jay Powell's future as a member of the board after his term as chair runs out in just about 2 weeks. Our coverage of the Fed decision and likely final Powell news conference will start about 30 minutes from now on Bloomberg Radio and Television and the Bloomberg Business app. And of course, we are watching for Pershing Square Holdings to start trading. The ticker is PSUS. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power now with Joe Mathieu.
All right, Amy, thank you so much. As we count down to our special Fed coverage less than a half hour away, we've got some important news in Washington with a pretty quiet day now that the king has left town, making his way to New York, in fact, where he's meeting with Mayor Mamdani at the 9/11 memorial. The Supreme Court takes our attention with an important ruling today that we have been waiting weeks and months for, limiting the use of the Voting Rights Act to create predominantly black or Hispanic election districts, rejecting a Louisiana congressional map that had a second majority black district, calling it an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. The decision along ideological lines, 6-3. We are also watching the confirmation process, and this plays right into our discussion about the Fed today of Kevin Warsh. He cleared committee just like that. It was less than a week ago that Tom Tillis dropped his objections after the DOJ dropped, if I can use that word, or transferred its investigation into Jay Powell from DOJ to the Fed IG. Tillis dropped his blockade, and just like that, Warsh, as expected, clears committee. The question is when he will see a full confirmation vote, and many expect that to take place on the floor of the Senate by the end of this week. But today, it's about the matter at hand and what it's going to mean for Jay Powell, his final meeting as chair. And I'm glad to say that we're joined by Stuart Paul, of course, Bloomberg Economics U.S. economist. It's great to see you. Just as I introduce you here, Stuart, red headline on the terminal, Brent rises above $119.50 a barrel, the highest since June of 2022. How difficult, before I ask you about Jay Powell's swan song, is this war in Iran, the reaction on the energy markets, going to make it for the Fed to ever cut rates?
Well, so the war in Iran creates two-way risk. Of course, it almost mechanically boosts inflation acting through gasoline, but it also weighs on real household spending growth. I expect that we're going to end up seeing some dulling real spending, especially in the second quarter. Given the fact that the Fed cannot do anything to bring additional barrels online, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Fed become a bit more attentive to downside growth risks in the future. I think that even as oil prices stay high, we could see the door open for rate cuts if we end up seeing further deterioration in the labor market and, again, that downside growth materializing.
Really interesting. Headlines, by the way, crossing the terminal on Pershing Square. Easy for me to say. We're waiting for the initial trades of this combined IPO. Pershing Square USA now indicated at $32.50 to $37.50 with an IPO price of $50. Pershing Square Inc. indicated to open at $19 to $22 each. When this crosses the screen, we'll, of course, let you know. What's Jay Powell going to say today about the way forward? We don't expect any change in rates. What's the statement going to read?
I expect that the statement is going to acknowledge the downtick in the unemployment rate that we saw in March. So if he were to describe the labor market as solid, if the statement were to describe the labor market as solid, for example, that might be an incrementally hawkish change to the statement. If we were to see any sort of additional emphasis put on well-anchored long-run inflation expectations, again, just hinting that the committee as it currently exists has no intention of cutting rates in the near term. I expect that those are going to be the sort of changes that we're going to see. Again, there's so much uncertainty, policymakers are just going to have to acknowledge that and really lean into uncertainty to maintain to keep their options open.
Move on to the news conference. All anybody's going to want to talk about is him, right? I mean, I guess they're going to want to talk about policy as well, but it's going to be, what are your future plans? Does he tell us today? You think when he plans to stay, when he plans to leave, I should say, or if he's going to stay once Kevin Warsh is confirmed?
I don't think he's going to break any news about his future plans today. I think he's going to be pretty precise and vague. And so I expect that, again, this is going to be the first question we're going to get. It'll probably be 30% of the questions we get at the press conference. And I expect that he's going to start by saying that he's there to represent the views of the FOMC. He's not there to make any personal announcements. I imagine that he's going to acknowledge that Kevin Warsh's nomination still needs to be debated on the Senate floor. It still needs to be voted on the Senate floor, so it would be premature for him to announce any sort of decision that he's made. So we're going to really need to focus on some of the code words that he might bring up during his press conference. For example, there's a difference between saying that he wants to follow the precedent of former Fed chairs, which would hint that he'd be willing to walk away from his board seat. There's a difference between that and saying that he wants to facilitate a leadership transition, for example. Like, to me, if I were to hear that, that would be a hint that he'd be more inclined to stay into 2028.
Okay. Stuart's got the decoder ring out. There was a question, one of the tip sheets this morning, if he just goes YOLO and starts saying everything he ever wanted to say about Donald Trump, but that would be a bit out of character, I'm guessing. You mentioned Kevin Warsh. Stuart, let's go back to the committee, the hearing that was held for his confirmation before Tom Tillis dropped his blockade, if you will, knowing that Warsh was confirmed today. Let's go back to the banking committee hearing. Remember Elizabeth Warren? Listen.
Trump is still going after control of the Fed, and he is keeping the threat of bogus criminal charges alive until he gets what he wants. These are uniquely dangerous circumstances to advance any Fed chair nominee. But Mr. Warsh is uniquely an unfit candidate.
It's no secret that the reason that Mr. Warsh's nomination could have been held up is because of my concern with the investigation. I want to thank the Department of Justice for the assurances that they gave me. I've got confidence that this investigation is over. And I think that Senator Warren, I get that she wants to score some political points, but she is flatly wrong on every point she just tried to make.
That'd be Tom Tillis right there, the senator from North Carolina who held this whole thing up, and knowing that he was a Kevin Warsh supporter. We could see a vote, Stuart Paul, on the floor as soon as this week. What will the Fed look like once Kevin Warsh is in the building? What will it mean for the culture in the building and his ability to achieve consensus?
Well, so first things first, he'd be replacing Stephen Myron on the Board of Governors. He would then be chairman of the board. I think that a lot of the folks in a lot of the staff are going to be a little bit nervous. This is Kevin Warsh, who has said that he is in favor of institutional reform. He's in favor of cracking heads if need be. So I imagine that he's not going to receive the warmest welcome from the staff. But then again, he's the guy who's going to be in the driver's seat. He's the guy who's going to be setting the agenda for board meetings. He's the guy who's going to be determining what interagency rulemakings he wants to consider and whether that could lead to deregulation of the banking industry so that he could achieve the sort of balance sheet reduction he said he wants. So I imagine that it might be a little bit of a culture shock for staffers, and I imagine that Kevin Warsh, when he walks back into the building for the first time in several years, I think that this is going to be a Fed that he perhaps struggles to change its course.
Interesting. I just saw Tom Keene walk by behind you. He must be on his way to the studio, so we're getting close here. The T-Rex of financial news is in the building. Stuart, it's great to see you, as always, on this Fed Day, no less. Stuart Paul with us live from New York. Let's assemble our political panel because the politics are pretty involved here with all of this when we consider the impact of the war in Iran, the pricing pressures that consumers are facing. It's a huge conversation on Capitol Hill, much like the confirmation of the new chair. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us. Jeanne is our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. There's Rick Davis, our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. Jeanne, what's the swan song going to sound like for Jay Powell when he stands before reporters today? Does he play it straight?
You know, I think he will, but I know many of us are hoping he does like an un-Powell-like thing and really lets us know how he feels, as to your earlier point, but I seriously doubt it. You know, it's interesting to listen to Senator Tillis, though. He says he has a lot of confidence this investigation is over. And we are sitting here, you know, not 24 hours after they indicted Jim Comey on seashells that he took a picture of a year ago. And I wonder, do you think that Jerome Powell feels quite as confident as Senator Tillis that this investigation is over? Or does the Department of Justice come roaring back? Because, of course, Todd Blanche is, you know, aiming to be the attorney general, not just acting. He is performing for an audience of one, and he is indicting a former FBI director for seashells. So, you know, I'm not sure if I'm Jerome Powell that I would feel quite as confident this thing is over, because apparently the retribution tour continues.
Well, I mean, if you just go and look at the statement from Judge Jeanne, she made it pretty clear that if this Inspector General report turns up new information, she could reopen this investigation. Rick Davis is, I'm guessing Jeannie's implying that Jay Powell might want to stay around for a while. Do you agree?
Well, first of all, it makes me laugh. You call her Judge Jeanne, U.S. Attorney Jeanne Pirro. Right. But I made the same mistake earlier today, so I applaud you. Yeah, look, I mean, the safety play here is stick around, right? You know, use the cover of the Fed and the lawyers of the Fed to defend yourself. And I would point out, I mean, you know, Chairman Powell did a video pushing back directly at the president when he was first attacked by the Justice Department. This guy has not held his breath when it comes to fighting for the Fed independence and his own credibility. And so I can imagine when he is replaced by Kevin Warsh as chairman, it may be a liberation moment for him, especially if we're right in that, like, the Department of Justice decides to continue to harass him.
Yeah. Are you optimistic about Kevin Warsh? Jeanne, I'm not sure where Stuart Paul left that with us, but he implied that he might not be terribly popular when he gets in the building. I guess Myron's going to have to figure out what to do in the meantime, because if Jay Powell doesn't leave, he might have to find another job. What will the Warsh culture look like?
That's right. I mean, I think to the earlier point, there is a lot of concern. You know, there is no question he is eminently qualified for the position, but things that he has said, and I think in my mind, even more importantly, just like Todd Blanche, the fact that so many people that Trump brings into any position, even one that is supposed to be independent, people feel beholden to the president. They feel pressured. And if we just go back to his hearing, that was the number one concern. Will you be able to maintain independence given the onslaught of pressure that you're going to feel? And as we all know, Trump will be your best friend one day and, criticize you up and down the next. And so I think that's where the concern is going to be raised. And of course, we are talking about a very fraught time. We've got the inflation, we've got high unemployment, we've got what seemingly now never ending, hopefully not, but never ending war. And we've got consumers very, very concerned, and an administration that just a few minutes ago was in Congress telling members that if they ask about the cost of something, it's a gotcha question. So all of that is the environment. So, bless Kevin Warsh for wanting to come in on this. But I do think it's going to be a really, really tough moment if he intends to fulfill his promise to maintain independence. And I hope he does.
Well, that's interesting. Rick, I don't know if the Fed chair is going to weigh in on the war with Iran, but you've seen oil prices today. I mean, these are some of the highest that we have seen yet since this all began. In fact, I think Brent is in a whole new world at $119.50, the highest since 2022. Their WTI and Brent are both up both over 7%. In the case of New York crude, up almost 8% today. Gasoline at $4.22. I can only imagine what the next UMich Consumer Sentiment Index is going to look like, which you frequently point to. It's going to handcuff the Fed, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that they're going to put me in a really tough position. I actually looked at some of the gallon gas prices in competitive Senate races, and it's a disaster for Republicans going into re-elections for some of these races, because in some cases it's approaching $4.50 a gallon. And when you look at the current spate of polling, which will be reflected, I'm sure, in the consumer sentiment indexes, folks are getting more and more grumpy. I mean, the president's numbers are falling precipitously in 1 month. That there's a lot of things going on. It could be the war, it could be the economy, but more and more people are going back to the cost of living. And I think that is really going to pinch the Fed on its policies.
It's really something. $4.23 for gasoline. Jeanne, we're creeping back up to that $5 or whatever the high was during the Ukraine war. And the president is now saying, according to reports today, he's telling his aides that we need to hunker down for an extended blockade in the Strait of Hormuz to essentially wait out the Iranians. If this goes up to $4.50 or $5, if crude oil keeps rising to $120 or $150, what will it mean for our economy? We're going to be talking about the R word at some point soon, aren't we?
We are. And some people have described it as, if this keeps up, the war and the blockade, we are heading towards a Titanic-style disaster. And, the idea that the president is going to wait out the Iranians, if we can just all take a step back and think, time is on the Iranian side. Iran can wait this out. They have been practiced at this for decades. What the president needs to do, and I'm happy he's not escalating, what he needs to do is get back to the negotiating table. The only end to this thing is to negotiate a settlement. And unfortunately for the president, given where we are now, that negotiation is not going to be pleasant or fun for the United States by any stretch of the imagination. Iran is saying, first things first, we end the war. Second thing is we open the strait and we remain in control, and then we'll deal with nuclear. That's not what the U.S. wants. But at this point, if we think we can wait it out, we should remember recent American histories of wars. When somebody feels that they're under an existential threat, and that is how Iran feels in the face of Israel and the U.S., they will fight to the end, and Iran is well prepared to do that. And so the impact on the economy in the U.S. and worldwide would be devastating, and Iran will sustain that. And I'm not sure that the U.S. people are going to feel the same way. That's the conundrum we have gotten in 60 days into this.
Just want to mention quickly the headline on the terminal on Pershing Square, USA, now indicated at $36 to $39 when trading begins in this IPO, remindingly the IPO price of $50. It has not begun trading yet. Reporting today, Rick, that President Trump summoned oil and gas executives to the White House yesterday. They were there presumably after the king went up to the Hill to talk about the menu of options here and how energy markets would respond to some of the various decisions the president could make, including what we're doing right now, just maintaining the blockade, but for a longer period of time, but also the potential for a resumption of strikes or other military kinetic action. Among the attendees, according to Axios, Chevron CEO Mike Wirth, you had the Treasury Secretary, Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, Kushner and Witkoff were both in the room. Is he going to ask them to start increasing production? Is there something that the oil industry can do to relieve some of the pressure?
Well, the problem is they can't increase production enough to supplant what the entire world is currently short of because of the closing of the strait. So prices are a global price. And regardless of our America First strategy and our ability to pump more and our ability to, be energy independent, a lot of the global pricing is still fixed. And I think a lot of these individuals you just described have a global point of view. They can explain to the president, that we're caught in the trap of our own making, that, as long as the strait's closed, the prices are going to continue to go up, and those affect the prices here at home. And you can see it every day in the reports on Texas crude pricing. So at the end of the day, there's no real solution that the U.S. oil producers can do just for the U.S. I mean, our economy is actually holding up better than virtually any other developed country in the world right now. But that doesn't fix his political problems, that people don't feel that way.
Yeah, really interesting. As we wait for trading to begin and ahead of our conversation with Senator Shelley Moore Capito, Jeanne, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, some folks say it's time to crank up the shale oil, but to Rick's point, it's going to be a drop in the bucket.
It would be a drop in the bucket. And let's not forget, even if the strait was open today, it is going to take time to get back to where we were. The answer to this is a difficult answer, but it is a negotiated settlement with Iran. And we are talking just to get back to square one, which is an open strait and a stabilized economy, and then deal in a negotiated way for a settlement on the nuclear end. That's the only answer we're going to see, and that's the only answer that will work. Everything else, the United States has lost steps to Iran, and that is a really unfortunate reality of where we are 60 days into this.
Yeah. Something tells me this will work its way into the conversation today with Jay Powell. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, thank you so much both for a great conversation. Bloomberg Politics contributors and our great panel today here on Balance of Power with our eyes on oil prices. Both WTI and Brent are up over 7%. And before we talk to the senator, let's bring in Amy Morris for a quick update on the markets today, energy prices, stocks, and beyond. Amy, what do you have?
Well, we got a renewed rally in oil. That's driving stocks and bonds lower. The standoff over the Strait of Hormuz, as you were discussing, continues to drag on as we check the markets for you all day long. Here at Bloomberg, the S&P 500 down 0.25%, NASDAQ down 0.3%, the Dow down 0.7%, 10-year Treasury yield at 4.39%, the 2-year yield at 3.9%, WTI topping $107 a barrel, Brent crude also topping $119 a barrel. Now, briefly, like a half hour ago, Brent crude hit $119.50 a barrel. That's the highest price we've seen in Brent crude since June of 2022. The entire stock market may be riding on four big names today: Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft, all reporting earnings this afternoon after the closing bell. We're ready for that. Bill Ackman's Pershing Square going public after raising $5 billion. Pershing Square USA shares indicated to open around $36 to $39 per share, still below the $50 IPO price, and the company still facing questions about what will drive demand in the secondary market. So for on-demand news 24 hours a day, you subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
All right, Amy, thank you so much. As we count down to special Fed coverage that's less than 10 minutes away, it's always a pleasure to bring in Senator Shelley Moore Capito, the Republican from West Virginia, joining us now live from Capitol Hill with a very important deadline ahead tonight that, Senator, we'd love to ask you about. It's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Around here, we say Happy Fed Day, so I hope you're celebrating. But importantly this evening, and I hope you're feeling all right, by the way, I've got the same pollen going on here.
Allergies,
I totally... This is Washington this time of year. The House cannot seem to find footing around a FISA reauthorization, which expires tonight. Is the House the main impediment to the president's policies right now?
Well, I think the president's been very forceful and asking, and so have the intelligence community as well, that we need FISA reauthorization to be able to disrupt and to catch and to be the most effective intelligence operation that we can be for the safety of the American people. I certainly would vote to reauthorize and have many times to reauthorize FISA. I think it's found to be helping us when we're investigating foreign individuals that are after us and wanting to do us harm. And I hope the House can see the way towards passing this tonight.
Well, indeed, that would be a pretty big deal. Does the president have options, as has been reported, to continue working under FISA if there is a lapse?
Well, right now, I think what we're operating under now is almost a 2-week suspension, and as you mentioned, it expiring later tonight. We would have the option, if possibly, to re-extend the extension. But I do think the president has some maybe extraordinary means that he can use to still use the asset of FISA for our own homeland security and our international security. Those options, but the preferred options, and certainly the best legal option, is to have this confirmed so that we can have it for the next 3 years, which is the goal. And this, people need to realize this is not listening in on American citizens. This is foreign people, foreign actors in foreign lands that are trying to disrupt and terrorize and figure out cyber crimes and other things to disrupt our national security.
We've got a Fed meeting today, once again, Senator, and of course, oil and gas prices, energy prices broadly are going to be part of the conversation as we consider the impact on inflation, or the potential impact. With a national average today of 423, I'm looking at West Virginia. You're hovering just over 4. You've got a 4 handle now in West Virginia at 406. I don't think we're going to be driving coal-powered cars anytime soon, which might bring prices down in your state, Senator. How concerned are you that this stalemate could drag on for months?
Well, I think we're all concerned, and I think rightly so. I think we see what the impacts of the situation in Iran and in the Straits has caused to the international markets. I noticed that the barrel of oil is up today fairly significantly, and that impacts our gasoline and particularly our diesel prices. When you talk about ag and other industries in this country that use diesel in great amounts, this has huge impacts for them. And so the longer it goes, the more not just impactful, but worrisome it is for the long-term economic effects. The president is working hard to try to bring this to a close. He's been at the negotiating table with his team. The problem is Iran is not trustworthy. We know this. But it seems to me as though they are having a lot of infighting to decide who's going to be in control of their country. And while I think that's good to have the disruptions, it makes it difficult to know who you're dealing with here. And, they want to take talks about whether they're going to develop a nuclear weapon off the table. In my opinion, that's a non-starter, because that's the real danger to the world. So hopefully sooner than later, we'll see things wrap up. The fact that we are talking and briskly talking, I think is a good indication that this could come to a close sooner than later.
I've been hearing from some of your colleagues in the Senate, Senator, that at the 90-day mark, we will be needing an AUMF to continue in Iran. And these are members who support the war, but that something should be codified congressionally, knowing now we have a $25 billion price tag. Would you support an AUMF at the end of this period of time, whether it's 60 today or 90 days?
I'm certainly going to look at that. I do think that there is a push and pull as to how much oversight we have. I will say the administration has been forthcoming in terms of information and classified briefings to keep us on top of what the situation is and what kind of assets we have there, and what little less transparent on what the real cost, but we should be getting more of that transparency there. That's where I think we can be most effective. Whether I would vote to authorize a use of force, I'm going to cross that bridge when I come to it. Hopefully things will have settled. We don't have boots on the ground there. I think that is a significant factor in terms of making the determination as to whether the president needs to come to Congress for a declaration of war. But there's no question in my mind that Iran is and was and continues to be a source of concern for us, and not in a small way. This, in my view, it was not if we're going to do this. It was when the president had the the nerve and the ability to do this at this time, and I have been supportive of that.
Yeah. We've only got a couple minutes left, Senator. Something that you know a lot about as chair on environment and public works is the impact of this energy conversation that we're having. And we've seen kind of a push and pull when it comes to alternative energy. Gas and oil prices start to go up. Fossil fuels are more expensive. People are, as you know, human nature would dictate, more likely to reach for an alternative. But we've seen an unwinding of wind, especially, and solar under the Trump administration. As the chairwoman on this important committee, do you see that alternate energy industry being unwound permanently?
You know, I'm one of those who believes we need everything, and we need everything all the time. I come from a coal state, natural gas state. So on that side of it, we've been providing energy for this country over 100 years, certainly from our coal. And so we have a great appreciation for that, and we still want to be a part of that, and we are. But at the same time, the insatiable desire for more power is going to require everything. And so my view is if we can permit, which I've been working on a lot, and keep the environmental parameters in place, we should have it all.
The president talks about coal, clean, beautiful coal, as he likes to say, as part of that, all of the above. What does that mean for your state?
Well, that means a lot. It means the elongation of a lot of the power generation from coal, where the Biden administration was trying to force the premature closing of many of our coal-fired power plants, but also the Biden administration was going to prevent you from being able to build a natural gas new facility to power. We have to do things that make sense, and baseload energy is absolutely critical here. If we don't know it now, we certainly have learned it over when we see the impacts, what happens internationally on our energy. So these are big things for our state because we're a big natural gas provider, but also coal.
Just quickly, does all of the above or everything include wind? The president has really isolated wind as kind of the outlier.
You know, I know the president doesn't have much affection for wind, either offshore or onshore. Yeah. Personally, we have wind in West Virginia, if it's sited properly and can generate the kind of power that we need. I think we should be looking at everything. Absolutely.
How about that? All of the above means all of the above. To Shelley Moore Capito, Senator, thank you. It's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. I'll meet you back here on the late edition of Balance of Power, 5 p.m. Eastern. Right now, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. The Fed decides. It starts right after this.